Begin this afternoon with a stunning plea from the family of a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. It has upended the furor Donald Trump faces over the Epstein case. The family of Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who was one of Jeffrey Epstein's most well-known accusers, has released a statement last night about remarks Donald Trump made on Tuesday. On Air Force One, Trump had said that he fell out with Jeffrey Epstein because he, quote, stole employees from him, including Virginia Roberts Giuffre. On that, the family says, quote, it was shocking to hear President Trump invoke our sister and say that he was aware that Virginia had been, quote, stolen from Mar-a-Lago. It makes us ask if he was aware of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal actions, especially given his statement 2 years later that his good friend Jeffrey Epstein likes women on the younger side. No doubt about it. We and the public are asking for answers. Survivors deserve this. And on the possibility that Trump may pardon Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell, the family says this, quote, Ghislaine Maxwell is a monster who deserves to rot in prison for the rest of her life for the extraordinary violence and abuse she put not just our sister Virginia through, but many other survivors who may number in the thousands. The nightmares of being trafficked never left our sister, even more than 20 years later. She would wake up screaming about what happened to her. The government and the president should never consider giving Ghislaine Maxwell any leniency. Maxwell destroyed many young lives, and she was convicted for only a fraction of the crimes she actually committed. She must remain in prison. Anything less would go down in history as being one of the highest travesties of justice. White House responded to the family's statement, saying that Donald Trump was directly answering a question about Virginia Giuffre. As for Ghislaine Maxwell, quote, they say no leniency is being given or discussed. The family of Giuffre told The Atlantic that they are, quote, reeling from her suicide back in April, and they are speaking out right now, in part because Maxwell has offered to testify before Congress, but only if she's granted immunity. The family of a survivor demanding justice and asking the questions we all have about President Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein is where we start today with MSNBC legal correspondent, my friend Lisa Rubin, plus MSNBC political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast. You know him well, Tim Miller, and former criminal division deputy chief at SDNY, MSNBC legal analyst and host of the new YouTube show Courtside, Christy Greenberg. All of us here this afternoon to try to make some sense of this. Christy, let's start with you. Your reaction to the family statement.
Well, Donald Trump's statement where he said that there were young women, plural, that were coming from Mar-a-Lago and being hired by Epstein and recruited from Maxwell, that raises a whole host of questions, not only about Donald Trump's knowledge, but about these women. In terms of the Maxwell case, only one of the victims was identified, Virginia Giuffre, as having come from Mar-a-Lago spa. So if there are other women, as Donald Trump has now said, there is more than enough here, putting on my former prosecutorial hat, there is more than enough here to warrant an investigation. So the question to Donald Trump should be, is he willing to order his Department of Justice to investigate? Who are these young women that worked at Mar-a-Lago that he then hired? Were they sex trafficked? And if so, by whom? If his spa was ground zero for recruiting these women to then sexually abuse, I would think the president would want to know about it. And then the next question is, if that investigation does happen, will he fully cooperate? Will Mar-a-Lago fully cooperate? I mean, these are really important questions. I think the family has every right to be asking them, and we should be asking them as well. And the person we should not be asking is Ghislaine Maxwell, because she is a liar. She is a proven liar. The people to be asking are the victims. Let's find the victims. Let's talk to the victims. Let's have an actual investigation here.
She's a proven liar and sex trafficker. Tim, I want you to sort of put your strategic communications former Republican hat on for a moment. Is the White House not dying to silence the president? The fact that on Air Force One, he would actually be able to think back to the year 2000 and remember who Virginia was, who, by the way, was under the age of 18. And he has hundreds, if not thousands, of employees at all of his properties. And he can specifically remember the employment of one specific underage employee who worked at his spa. Is that not a huge mistake for him to be talking about any of this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that there's any strategic communications coming from the president on this point. I think the people around him surely would be wishing they were taking a different tact on this, because all his answer did was create more questions, right? I mean, you laid out one of them. Why does Donald Trump remember the details of a 16-year-old spa staffer at one of his clubs? When it's not as if Jeffrey Epstein was like poaching his general counsel or something like that. So I think that
exactly.
that raises a lot of questions. It adds more questions because his timeline is actually off. Virginia Giuffre was taken and abducted and groomed from Mar-a-Lago, and then groomed by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in the year 2000. And then Trump says that him and Epstein had the falling out in 2004, though Epstein was still a member of the club till 2007, right? So the timeline of this doesn't even lay out. And the other thing is, if we're just going to be purely cynical about this, and I think it's important we keep the victims, in mind first, but just looking at this politically, being purely cynical, as a talking point, the Trump White House had a decent one, which was that Jeffrey Epstein was a creep and he didn't realize it, and he threw him out in 2004 once he realized the extent of how big of a creep he was. That was like their talking point. I don't think that was a true talking point, but it was one that they had. And then Trump just changed it all of a sudden and made it about something else completely, something that's far less sympathetic to him and raises more questions.
Lisa, can you walk us through the Trump administration's interactions with Maxwell, like where we stand right now? Because, again, this is a woman who has been convicted of sex trafficking, which took place over a decade.
Yeah. Well, Steph, the interaction and the timeline here is really curious because on July 14th, the Trump administration, through its Solicitor General, submitted a brief to the Supreme Court saying Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction should stand, that the sole basis that she advanced for challenging it in the Supreme Court was that she was entitled to basically claim protection under the same sweetheart deal that Epstein had gotten from Florida prosecutors. She claims now that deal was valid, and it should also extend to her because it covered his alleged co-conspirators, including but not limited to four named people, none of which were Ghislaine Maxwell. But that's the only basis on which she's challenging her conviction to the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General, John Sauer, another former criminal defense lawyer to Donald Trump, opposed that on the 14th. On the 15th is when Donald Trump was first confronted by the Wall Street Journal with the story about the birthday book. And very soon thereafter, that Friday, the Department of Justice gave another statement to the Wall Street Journal, basically saying, no, we didn't really brief him about the findings of our review of the Jeffrey Epstein files. We gave him an overview, but we're not going to say whether or not we told him that he was covered in that. By that Monday, that's when Todd Blanche was saying that he thought Ghislaine Maxwell had something to say, that he was going to pursue that line of investigation and have a conversation with her. He went down to Tallahassee, Florida, where Ghislaine Maxwell is now incarcerated, and had 2 days of conversations with her, not in the federal prison where she's serving time, but in a U.S. attorney's office. So she theoretically could be more comfortable during those conversations. We still don't know who else from the Department of Justice was there. We don't know how that conversation was recorded, if at all. And yet, we still don't know what the resolution is, right? Because at the same time that they are moving to unseal grand jury transcripts, which Christie and others have been insisting, rightly, are not going to show us much of anything, they have not said definitively that they will not offer a commutation or a pardon to Ghislaine Maxwell. And that's, Steph, where things stand right now as we await the victims putting in their own filings next week about whether they think the grand jury testimony should be unsealed.
Tim, would Trump supporters, who have been honestly the most outspoken in terms of demanding answers about Epstein, how would they take to Ghislaine Maxwell getting pardoned, even if they got more answers? Would they be okay with it? Again, she's a proven liar.
Right. She is a proven liar. And, I mean, the actions that she was taking with Jeffrey Epstein were downright evil. I would say this. Trump supporters, he got 78 some odd million votes last time. And so... and there'd be different reactions. I think that he has a core base of support that goes all the way back to his comment in 2016 about how he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and they'd be with him. And I think that's true for probably about a third, maybe half even of his voters. I think that he has some newer voters, particularly, that we're kind of colloquially calling the people in the manosphere, the younger men of all races, really, who flocked to Donald Trump this last election, and who listened to kind of Joe Rogan and these types of folks. I think a lot of them, you're already seeing this, feel like he's trying to play them for a fool, and that they're not really interested in being played for fools, and that a lot of them have deeper passions about the Jeffrey Epstein case and the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy than they do about Donald Trump. So I think that he could lose those. And then you have some of the folks that either via the fact that they're genuine or just that they're more anti-elite and anti-people in power than they are pro-Donald Trump, people on the kind of Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Candace Owens, like more conspiratorial side of the Trump base. I don't think a Ghislaine Maxwell pardon or commutation or anything will go over very well in those quarters. And so I think that he has a couple of, sort of elements of his voting bloc, of his coalition, that are very vulnerable here. I don't think that's the core base of like people that wear red hats and go to the rallies, but I think that among people who voted for him, he definitely has real risk here. And I think they're obviously aware of that.